there. Welcome to Rested Mamas Talk. We're Chelsea
and Mika, your certified pediatric sleep coaches who were once exhausted mamas just like you turned into rested mamas who now have helped hundreds of families get better sleep in 3 days with an alternative to traditional sleep training.
As creators of the Association Fading Sleep Method, we teach a responsive and holistic approach. Our podcast is dedicated to sharing the journey from true parental exhaustion to thriving parenthood.
From real sleep tips from us and other experts to real stories of families just like you.
Let's get rested. Hello, it is Chelsea here and Mika. Hey, Mika.
Hey, Chels.
Welcome to another episode of our wonderful Rested Mamas Talk podcast. This has really just been so enjoyable for us, and I can't wait to talk about what we're going to talk about today, because this is, again, something we frequently hear, and that is, Mika, what is it?
We're going to talk about, I'm going to put this in quotations if you're reading, or if you're listening to this on the podcast, bad sleepers. So how many times on a discovery call with us that we hear a family say, but just to warn you, I have a really bad sleeper. And so
have you worked with somebody who has this bad of sleeper before? That's another one we hear all the time.
So it's funny because I always kind of tell families that, well, we don't get the good sleepers here. Right?
You're not talking to me because everything's going great.
Yeah. Yeah. But I really do want to break that down a little bit, because there is so much to be said. And I think there's so much impacting a family in general when they actually say that.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's also a lot of underlying just kind of emotions too, outside of just like, I have a bad sleeper, quote unquote, right? We've talked a lot about before, just honestly, how emotionally draining at times it can be. But where I have heard a lot of that is when we also have had clients that have tried to do a sleep training before on their own, and it wasn't as successful or had hoped to be as successful as what it ended up being. And so they're like, well, I've tried that, so I just have a bad sleeper, right? Or, my baby is 13 months old, Chelsea, and this is just kind of where I'm at. I highly doubt that things can change now. Is that something that you've heard before?
Yeah, I would say the third category is, my child doesn't even sleep in a stroller. Like, I can't even get them to sleep assisted. And so I have a really bad sleeper. They just don't want to go to sleep.
They fight sleep. Even when I see that I heard today, even I see that they're really tired and that they're so exhausted, but they're just fighting me and fighting me and fighting me. So, when I hear that, there are a couple of things that kind of trigger in my mind. What triggers in your mind, Mika, when you hear that? Because I always have a couple of things like, okay, my checks go off in my mind. What are those for you?
Totally. I mean, in general, when I hear bad sleeper, the first thing I want to, say to a family is, first of all, it's not your fault, because I know we're all thinking that. Right. We just talked about mom guilt a few episodes ago, and gosh, they're a really bad sleeper. Either something is wrong with my child or something is wrong with whatever I'm doing. And the first thing I will say is, there is nothing wrong.
Yes.
The second thing that triggers in my mind is just that, I mean, maybe this is my optimistic self, is that I really don't believe there is a bad sleeper. There's just a certain amount of sleep and a certain approach, a certain method, a certain routine that just needs to fit to your child to help it be better for you. And we have to define that.
Well, and that's actually what first comes in my mind, is that, and I really want all of you to hear this, is that from where I stand, you know, there's really no such thing as a bad sleeper. I never want parents to kind of get to the point where they kind of just throw up their, not throw up their hands, but kind of just get to a point where you're just kind of giving up and just, this is what it is. Okay. There is always a way and kind of an avenue to find better sleep. Okay. Even if your child is 4 years old, even if your child is, you know, only sleeping on you, know, whatever it is, I truly, and I mean, Mika and I truly mean that. You know, we more than anything, it is just a lot of detective work. I feel like we are a little bit of baby detectives because a lot of times it is just one missing puzzle piece that we need to iron out to help you get to better sleep.
So
So for me,
Chelsea,
yeah,
question
go
though.
for
So I'm a mom or a dad, or I'm listening to this and I'm like, okay,
it.
really? I mean, how do you know my child is not a bad sleeper? And like, what does it mean that there are no bad sleepers?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so there are sleepers out there that are having sleep challenges or babies and kids that aren't sleeping as much as they should or need. That is true. But at the end of the day, sleep is needed for survival, right? So it is an innate thing that we all need to do, including your children. And so it's not that your child is just a bad sleeper or kind of incapable of having really good consolidated sleep, but rather it's more of finding the right routines and the right daytime schedule, how they're falling asleep, all of those things in order for them to meet those sleep needs, right? You know, we talk about this all the time, right, Mika, about how sleep is like a cake, right? Where there are so many ingredients that play into a child having really good, consistent, and consolidated sleep. So I think a lot of times when we're looking, parents say, "Oh, I have a bad sleeper," yeah, I'm not going to downplay it. You know, very well may mean that they are waking up frequently, that they're having really short naps, that they are really, all intents and purposes, not really sleeping very much at nighttime. But that doesn't just mean that that's forever how it is. You know, that your child is capable of having that good sleep, right?
I do
Um,
think that stems somewhere though. When you say
yeah,
maybe for them, yeah, it kind of feels that way. But I also feel like when a family is triggered to say that they have a bad sleeper, there's a comparison somewhere.
there's a lot of stigmas around it. And I think that where what we always say, right, Mika, is we're always like, okay, well, honestly, you guys, if what you're doing right now is working for you, that is great. So even though, let's say I have a baby, right, who is 8 months old, who is waking up 3 times a night, you know, that's really actually working okay for me. But then I have a friend who is sleeping through the night telling me that I have a bad sleeper or that they can't believe that I'm waking up in that long, that many times in the middle of the night. I think there's also just a little bit of like a kind of, I don't want to say peer pressure, but there's a lot that's talked about around you, regarding how much sleep your child should be getting,
I
right?
mean, there's talk, there's peer pressure, but honestly, nothing online is going to help you determine that
No,
you're going to feel like you have a good sleeper. And so I did just want to pause there first before
hmm
we get into the how around it, and really just
sure,
focus on the mentality first. So I was on a discovery call today,
okay,
and um and the family, didn't have an uncommon story, right? We hear it all the time. Baby was sleeping pretty decently in the first
hmm
trimester, then started all of a sudden waking every hour, every 2 hours out of pure survival. The family started co-sleeping. um,
right,
Co-sleeping for the second half of the night turned into the whole night, turned
hmm
every single nap is either a contact nap or in a stroller. And now baby is 14 months old and honestly has never at this point slept in their own crib. And
Yeah.
at the end of the discovery call, when I mentioned, this is our approach, there is
Mhm.
an approach that's going to match your child. Dad actually said, it's just really hard because we have a neighbor across the street who my sister has a baby, and they just keep telling us that their children sleep, and so ours must be getting better, but ours is older. And why are we,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I must have a bad sleeper. And
Yeah.
comparison is so counterintuitive, and
And it's very draining.
they're
It's
so draining.
so draining. And that, to kind of go back to a little bit to what you were saying, what I was saying too, is like it should start with you, right? Like where you are, if you are in a place where you are feeling like something isn't working, then yeah, totally. We can definitely figure it out. But don't feel like you have to make a change or feel like you have a bad sleeper because of what's going on around you, what your neighbors are saying, right? Or what you're seeing on Instagram, or, all of those things. At the end of the day, you're the parent and it goes to you. And if you're not feeling like things are bad, then that's okay. It may not be bad for you. You know what I mean, Mika?
Yeah,
Um,
so let's flip it now. Okay, so
okay.
let's do that. So now we've got maybe a parent that's like, okay, nope, I feel pretty bad.
This is not sustainable. This is not working
Yes,
out.
someone else has made me feel super guilty, but now that I think about it, I'm super sleep deprived, but like
Yeah.
I'm convinced that I have a bad sleeper. So, what can they do? What happens? What happens if they've exhausted all solutions or options?
Well, if they've exhausted all solutions, I mean, that's definitely where, it's okay to just seek out a little bit of assistance, right? To help you with that. With somebody like ourselves, right? But it we talk a lot about how we talk about bedtime, nighttime, but so much of where sleep starts and that consistency is during the daytime. And so, what we really want to help you find is that sleep pressure balance. So, helping your child set them up for success so that they can have that need or the desire in their brain to go to sleep, but also to stay asleep. Okay. When parents have said, like, I've tried this, and this, that's where it takes me and say, okay, well, let's actually like step back for a moment, right? What not only have you tried, but of those things, what at any point were they beneficial? Did it work at some point? Did it not work? And then really dive into every single component to really figure out those needed pieces. We always say too to definitely always be in consultation with your pediatrician as you are going through this process as well, because they're obviously a good resource as well outside of us as sleep coaches. But I mean, that's, I guess, where I always start is let's actually take a step back and actually look at each one of those components to figure out where is the missing piece, right? What about for you? Kind of what would you say to everyone's like, well, I've done everything.
Well,
I
so
did it.
our philosophy is where I go back to when we think about what sleep is. So for those of you who have been listening to our podcast, we always say that sleep is like cake. But the thing is, everyone's sleep cake looks different.
Hmm.
So there isn't one cake for every single child. Your
Yeah.
one child is going to have very specific ingredients that is going to make their sleep cake, and it's not going to look the same. So when I hear that and I hear, we expanded all options already, the first thing I think of is, well, first of all, let's dive into the data and let's figure out what's not worked, because guess what?
Hmm.
there are a lot of other options and a lot of other combinations. And it is impacted by things like environment, by what the sleep schedule looks like, and not just naps, not just
Mhm.
sleep times, but what's your variance in the day? What's your variance at bedtime? Two, how are we guiding our children to realize they can fall asleep on their own? Because as you know, our philosophy is they can innately fall asleep on their own. It's about routine and whether they feel comfortable and safe that they can fall asleep on their own.
Right.
And so those all together combine in different ways. They need to be a different
Mhm.
based on the child. And so we need to dive in specifically for each of those to figure out there is a way. And I don't think we've ever not found a way.
We haven't. Well, and I think that, and it really goes back to our philosophy, and we talk a lot about this within our program, but this is something that really anybody can do, is that, yes, you can Google, we talk about this in our webinar, where you can Google and look for schedules and, go by certain specific wake windows. But what we really want to help you find is what your child's internal sleep clocks, sleep patterns want to do, and actually try to align your daytime schedule and routine to that. A lot of times, where parents have not been successful is when they do try to push them into a certain schedule or routine that's either not working for them or one that they're not ready for. And so that really is the basis, where we can really help all parents, to find that, and a lot of times is actually the secret to getting a just more consistent sleep as well, within that. So, I don't know, it's a lot. Mika, and it's, I know we talked about parent guilt and mom guilt in another episode, but it really can feel just very overwhelming. And really, especially when you're sleep deprived, even know where to start, right?
And
So,
it's easy to think as sleep too is really one dimensional because that's how it's communicated. One from even pediatricians, right? Hey, just sleep train, or oh, your child is not ready to sleep train.
yeah.
They're thinking about sleep in a pretty one dimensional way. And then when we read things online, it's in a one dimensional way. And it feels like it's supposed to be straightforward. Apply a nap schedule and then sleep train. And
Mhm.
you are supposed to get XYZ. And so when you think you have 1 + 2 and then you get 4 or you get 0, it can feel really bad.
Defeating. Like, I did what that told me to do.
So
Now what do I do?
actually, this is a good example. This is a good
Yeah.
example. Um, so we've had a client, I don't know if you remember this, Chelsea, where they mentioned that and they said, look, this is kind of our last option here.
Yeah.
And we have tried sleep training, right? Again, loosely defined.
Mhm.
We've tried sleep training. It didn't work, or it worked partially, I think, in this situation. Like
Yeah.
baby falls asleep independently 50% of the
Cent
time.
of the time. I did remember. So yeah, I
Yeah.
remember this.
50%
Yeah. Yeah.
of the time. And our schedule is really good.
Mhm.
We pretty much wake up pretty consistently between 6 and 6:30.
Mhm.
Bedtime we have packed down. It's really pretty much anywhere between 7 and 8.
Yeah.
And they take really, really good naps in the day, but night is just bad. So I really don't think it's our schedule. Respond to that, Chelsea.
Well, this is where, for all, okay, because I think that sometimes like our definition of consistent is a little bit different than others, and that is okay. But I will say this. Unfortunately, with infant sleep, even like 15 minutes of variation can cause some difference in your child's sleep pressure. Again, that feeling that your child has to go to sleep, but also to stay asleep. And also in connection with that, as crazy it sounds, but your child's sleep today is affected by what happened 48 hours before. So, when you kind of think about it, even though to us as adults, 30 minutes here, an hour there sounds like really not that much. To a little baby's body, that's actually a lot. And that can and often does cause some hiccups in your child's sleep. It's the best way I can describe it. It's kind of hiccups, little small challenges. And so one of the first things that you should and can really do is to look at where's your child, when I should say on average, what time is your child waking? And then based off of that time, we want to keep it consistent. And what we mean by that is almost exact. So, if they're waking between 6:30 and 7, that means I would have a target of 6:15 every single day. Mika, wake them up if they're not awake at 6:15, and then make sure that first nap time is the same each day as well.
So that's an example though, right? So I think
Yeah.
the biggest takeaway from that is when Chelsea and I hear that, and maybe you have heard yourself say that, is that even in that situation where you feel like my schedule's pretty good, there's actually some
A lot of variances within that.
there's key details and actually approaches that we can do to even close the gap on your schedule for the day.
Yeah.
That makes a really big difference. And Chelsea even said something, just think about yourself. Let's say you had a really bad night of sleep.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry, sometimes I know we're not old, but sometimes I feel like I'm old.
I feel like I'm old.
I know, and I hate to say that,
I'm like, oh, it's 8:00. I
40.
gotta go to bed.
I have a couple years of 40, but I'm really impacted by sleep. So if I have a really bad night, and I pretend like I am, in my late 20s again and try to stay up with friends, I could sleep in the next day, and guess what? I don't feel good still.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about drinking. I'm talking about
Just like, yeah.
it takes me 2 to 3 days of consistency to kind of regain my disruption from that day. So
Right.
so there's things that you can dive into. Other things that I would look at in that situation, and we did look in that situation, is again, sleep training is loose. So how were we responding to baby? There are things called loose associations, which maybe we should talk about in a future podcast.
Yeah.
And so there are things, so don't lose hope and feel like I've expended everything. There are just so many, there's, I swear, a million different combination of things that we can do. And the detective work that Chelsea mentioned is, let's find what matches and works for your baby and works for you.
And I don't want that, but that can sound really overwhelming. But so I don't want you to think that when you begin this process, or if you choose to begin this process, first of all, that it is going to be these millions upon millions upon millions of things to try. That's not what we want to do. And that's
formula.
Yeah, there is.
Formula to figure out what it is, I guess. That's a good point. Like there is, it's not like we're going to go through the million ones and figure it out. Like there is actually a way.
And that's a lot to put you through, and that's a lot to put your baby through, to be honest. And so it is very much a formula. It is very like A, B, C, you get D, right? And so, but I guess what I'm just trying to say is that can be sounding very daunting. So I don't want you to think that it is going to be a very extended process, because that's not it. When working with us, I don't even know, Mika, how many clients we've worked with at this point, but I think we kind of started to have an eye for it, right? Like, oh, there it is. That's the thing. And it's pretty quick to remediate after that. So, and I think too, one thing I always say to every single one of our families, and I know you say it in your own way too, is that don't lose, yes, faith that your child's a bad sleeper, but don't lose confidence in your child. Your child is very capable. And we always say, having confidence in your child is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I even had this actually a client that I'm working with right now, Mika, and she was so funny. I just like talking to her just makes me crack up, but she's always like, "Oh, I know it's not her. I know it's me." Like I know it's me. And not to say that, if you're listening to this, that's not necessarily the case, but just know that your child is capable, and it really is just a matter of finding that balance and staying consistent, and also just finding, those puzzle pieces there for them. So
That works for them, that meets them where they are. I mean, that's
yeah.
really what it is.
Yeah. Okay, so we do something at this podcast every time, and that is where we give you 3 specific sleep tips at the end of each episode. So these are our Rested Mamas Talk sleep tips. We really every single time.
Perfect.
We need a jingle. So that was my jingle for the day. So our Rested Mama sleep tips. Here we go, Mika. Okay, so today is all about I have a bad sleeper, what we think about. So our first one is, and we've kind of already said it, but don't lose hope. Okay, even if you have a toddler, if you have a 13-month-old, if you have a 6-month-old, better sleep is always possible. Okay, it's really just a matter of examining your child's ingredients and puzzle pieces, examining their schedule, and then also any possible things like lingering sleep associations, which we should, Mika, make this our next podcast, actually, now the more we're talking about it. What is our number 2?
Our number 2 is a disrupted sleep pattern. So whatever it is you are feeling right now, there is an opportunity to match something that meets your child. So it's kind of a support for the first one, right? Don't lose hope. Something is possible. And then the what is possible is there is going to be something and an approach that can match your child specifically. So just because one method didn't work, that doesn't mean that no methods are going to work.
No.
There is something.
And know too that like even us, like we're not so like, yes, do we have our formula? Do we have our approach that 100% works? But we also are very familiar with all approaches too, and so that's something that we talk a lot about with our clients as well. Even just we were talking about it recently with one, just like, okay, well, how can we tailor that to more match your needs too? So, and then the last one is no comparing. For me, as a first-time mom, this was the hardest thing to do. And it is easier said than done. But at the end of the day, really try your very best not to compare. Yes, is sleep related, and is one child's sleep similar to another child's sleep? Yes. But, comparing your child's sleep to others is just really counterproductive within your specific sleep journey and your child's specific sleep journey. We have worked with, hundreds of clients. I kind of want to know the number, by the way, Mika. I kind of want to know how many clients we worked with. But, and honestly, yes, are there similarities? But there is always something that is slightly different from each child to each child. So, it's not productive to try to compare, because that's just not where your child's at, and that's okay. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to, yes, another Rested Mamas Talk. We are going to be back next time. We would love to hear from you. And that if you have any topics that you would like us to talk about, feel free to let us know.
Find us on Instagram. Feel free to post and chat with us. We really do. I mean, we love to talk about stuff in general.
We love to chat. Awesome. But we're seriously, you guys, we want to make sure that this podcast is serving you and your needs and where you guys are at. So let us know. Instagram. Love it. Thank you so much, Mika, my best friend. I appreciate your time. Okay. All right, guys, stay rested, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Rested Mamas Talk. To stay connected and get more sleep tips from us, follow us on our Instagram page at rested_mama_happy_baby.
To find out how we're helping families around the world get better sleep, check out our website, restedmamahappybaby.com, or chat with us directly to learn more about our programs. Chat with you next time.